I think that the concept of a subject is where everything has to start with me, and kind of everything, all the inspiration comes from that. So if it's a magnolia or some time of day or particular place, that's where you start, and then after that, sometimes the paintings right then will be very tight and I'm trying to be loyal to that topic, trying to do the best, to represent it with as most respect, like the Katrina paintings. I really didn't feel comfortable abstracting that very much because, I wanted to, have the feel and the look and the respect of the situation. Where if it's flowers, I think Manet said something like that flower still life was a good place for experimentation and innovation because, no one's counting how many petals there are. Does that magnolia have the proper amount of petals? So you can kind of do anything you want with it. It opens it up more where if it's something that other people have some fondness for or some feeling for, you kind of I don't feel like I can do that so much.
Well, like when you go, say you go on a fishing trip, like different than say me going on a fishing trip. Are you seeing paintings or like?
Definitely am.
Or do you go to bed and you sort of like all of a sudden it just sort of comes to you, or you wake up the next day and it happens? You're just visually seeing these paintings when you're experiencing things?
I can't even go on a trip. I can't go do anything where that doesn't happen. I'm just constantly feeling guilty for not drawing or doing something to do with what I'm seeing because there's always something. This morning it was rainy. It's February. It has a certain look outside, and I was in the thing eating breakfast thinking, I should be noting this. I know I'm down here to do something else, but I should be noting this situation. So yeah, I'm always seeing people, and like the portraits, I'll go fishing with some guy who does not want to have his portrait painted, I'm pretty sure. He doesn't, I don't tell anybody that I'm an artist or anything, I'm just fishing. And, which is true, but, I look at the people and in conversation and when we're doing our bit, and that's where that comes from. But they get their portraits painted and they don't ever know what happened. And that's the beauty of it for me because I can go for the strength, trying to make a good painting and not trying to make a good likeness. They're just so strong. They're just so, to me, I don't know, I grew up going to the Gulf Coast, the Texas coast when I was a kid, and we waited all year. People who didn't have a lot of money in North Texas, that's where they went. They went to Galveston or some Padre or somewhere. So you waited all year to spend 5 days down there. And that memory of going down and doing that, it was so strong, and it happened every year, and I always wanted to go to the same place. And so now going to any coastal area, there's something very deep, hardwired in there that makes me, just brings back that whole thing. And that kind of strength and that kind of, it's very deep. It's pretty deep stuff. I got to have some water and I got to have some coast. And it doesn't have to be the Gulf Coast, but that just so happens because of where I live, where I've spent most of that time. And then you develop a love for it, And for instance, being down here in New Orleans we've been showing for 30 years, so even just coming for that length of time, you develop quite a relationship with that place.
Well, so there is a very deep affection for the subject matter of the Gulf Coast, basically.
I think sometimes, yeah, sure. And I think the places are so amazing that if I can just get a little bit of it, if I can just get just a tenth of it, then it'll probably be a pretty interesting looking painting. It's such a strong image, that Katrina thing was, it was such a strong imagery, just watching it on TV in Dallas, that, there were some amazing stories and those portraits of those people. I was taping TV shows and watching other ones, and just the stories that were on these people's, etched in these people's expression when they were telling the stories was, memorable.
Most of these people, some of them you have very close relationships to, and a lot of them you clearly have
momentary
connection with these people.
Some of them were really long relationships, and some of them are just seeing people, and they're so memorable that you just a quick flash, you'd remember them.
And how would that be important? I mean, why? Like, how does that translate into them ultimately becoming the subject of a painting?
You know, I think kind of actually that the landscapes, the still lifes, and the portraits are all portraits to me. They all feel like portraits because they're all a particular thing at a particular time of day that I'm feeling something very strongly about, and that all just seems to be very similar. But the thing that no matter how strongly I feel about it, the thing that I realize is that it's a painting. It's not a person or a flower. It's a painting. And that if that painting and the way that it's built isn't interesting, then it's really not. I'm not doing my job.
Just getting a little bit into the process of the work, and you know, like in particular these portraits, and having worked with you and being a part of seeing the evolution of the work. Generally, you start working in a smaller scale.
Right.
Is that right?
Yeah, it's drawings.
Is it just because it translates easier from the drawings or these ideas that your memories or?
For me, what I do is I make notes, just small drawings and notes of things, little pictures of people. You'll see somebody, you go back and make some little notes and stuff. Rather than drawing from them like that, everybody gets self-conscious and thinks it's weird, you know. So I'll just make little notes and things about colors and composition. And then when I take all that back, basically I have the memory of it and these notes. And I've never really used photographs too much until Katrina, because you couldn't get down here. But I try to not pay any more attention to the photographs than I would drawings. Because when you paint from a photograph, it's pretty much telling you this is how it should look. You know, it's not a suggestion like a drawing or your memory, which is like even more sketchy. It's a very distinct thing, and so I try not to really only use it for rudimentary stuff, and drop it as quickly as possible. But the drawings and memory leave it open for interpretation. And if you remember, we were talking about Galveston, if you remember Galveston, it's going to be a little rosier and a little more spectacular than it might actually be.
You're creating these smaller works generally as sort of like a launch, you know, on your sort of subject or ideas. Mm-hmm. And then sometimes you'll decide to sort of go further and make the painting again in a larger size.
Right.
And I imagine it's an entirely different process. And how do you, like, what sort of motivates you to go there or to direct those? And then I have another question, you know, on the Katrina, since you keep, and I want to talk about that more, but those you seem to have almost sort of developed the personality, the characters that were going to be part of a major, what I consider one of your masterpieces, which is the Storm painting, which is a crowd scene in front of the Superdome. Whether or not you were doing that with the intent of making the Storm painting, or whether those people just sort of developed into what became something much more monumental.
Well, in that particular case, you know, Raphael and you know, a lot of the Renaissance artists would put themselves in a painting, and they'd make, Michelangelo would be, you know, they'd use their buddies as, you know, Plato. You know, Leonardo got to play that part, and they would paint all this together. So the thing for me is that I would see these individual interviews of these people, and then put them together, and then I'd see a crowd scene. But crowd scenes are always so, in a photograph, nebulous. You could see that what it feels like, but you couldn't really concentrate on it. So I took those various different small portraits and then made the big scene from it. So it makes it probably bigger than and more poignant than it would have been if you just painted a generic crowd scene. You know, I made sure you could see everybody's face, and I made sure that you could see where they were looking, and that they were looking at you, and that they weren't happy, and that they were frustrated, and all the different feelings that was going through everyone's mind was in even a big picture. That was 10 years ago. There was something that happened at that point. Maybe it was my age or, you know, whatever, but that changed. You know, that changed a lot of things. That changed the work in some respect after that. And, you know, even these little portraits like that, I'll do a little portrait, and if it looks like that you could paint the rest of the body and what he was doing, then I'll go from there. But if it just looks like it was good at that point, then I'll leave it alone.
So in other words, the work sort of speaks to you and tells you whether or not it needs to go further,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the gauge that you use as
Right.
far as why some pieces become more
Scale.
and some pieces stay the way
Mm-hmm.
they were originally done. I mean, when you do the larger scale, I mean, it has to be a different challenge. I mean, it's got to be a different, you have a different goal, I would imagine. Am I right? Or?
Well, the thing that scale does for me, two things. You know, coming up in abstract, the abstract expressionist time period, everything was big, and all the gestures were big. And so when I'm painting a small painting like this, you really can't make very many gestures and you're done. It's like a small abstract expressionist painting, and it's over. Where if you have more time and it's larger, you can spread it out, and brush marks will represent, you know, a giant brush mark like that could be an eyelid or something. It translates from something grander to a subject in space.